Hey guys, how are you? Dr. Jordan here. We're going to be talking on this presentation about ethics. So this is going to be a fairly short lecture, but what I want you to do is be able to, or definitely go into Moodle and look at the OT Code of Ethics that is posted on there, and be sure to read that information and know that information for class next week when we meet. Because we're going to be having a continuation of this discussion on Tuesday next week. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing that I want to talk about is what is the difference between confidential and anonymous. This is one thing that many of the faculty have tried to get students to understand. So this is just going to be a little exercise in having you identify the differences between the two. And hopefully this is going to help moving forwards. And we'll talk about this in class again next week when we meet. So when we talk about confidential, these are just a couple of things that come to mind when we think about confidence or confidentiality. As OTs, we of course work with individuals and we get personal information about them. We get their name and phone number, their birth date, their address, their social security number, but we also get sensitive medical and health information that we're not really able to share. That's what it means to be confidential. So this is information that we receive that we don't share with anybody that is not directly involved with that client. Now, when you think of confidentiality, you can also think about being involved in a test or a research project or a crime investigation. Again, if you're involved in a situation like that, you're not going to share information for anybody that is not involved within that project or that testing site or that organization. That's what that means to be confidential. When we talk about being anonymous, this is when a person gives no personal information about him or herself, and we should not be asking for specific personal information that might give that person's identity away. So if the person would need to follow up to retrieve results from maybe a survey or medical results that we're giving, or medical applications that we're giving through an anonymous nature, the individual would be given a unique identifier, such as a number. Think of if you've ever given blood. So when you give blood, that's anonymous. What they do is they have your name linked, but then they put a barcode on there to identify you through a barcode instead of the person themselves. So people don't know whose blood you're getting if, in fact, you need a blood transfusion. That's kind of an example of being anonymous. So we're going to share a few more examples, and what you're going to do is you're going to state if this scenario that I'm talking about is anonymous or confidential. So if you leave an unsigned note in the principal's of the school's mailbox about something that was observed happening in the classroom, this would be an example of anonymous or confidential. Meeting with your advisor to share that you have witnessed cheating in class is an example of being anonymous or confidential. You send a text message to the site that you're interested in attending for a field period, but you forget to sign or type your name. This is an example of anonymous or confidential. You are shadowing at your field period site and want to know more about a 7-year-old boy that you've been working with. You arrange to meet with your supervisor at the end of the day in a private office to discuss him. This is an example of anonymous or confidential. A staff member writes a specific diagnostic test or diagnosis next to a patient's name on a communication board that is visible to visitors on a patient's unit. Is this anonymous or confidential? Every 6 weeks at the practice holds a vasectomy clinic. Normal Saturday morning surgery continues as well. Patients for both clinics come along and book in at the reception and take a seat in the waiting room all together. No one is aware that there are 2 different clinics going on at the same time. Nothing is advertised to say that there's a vasectomy clinic taking place in the morning. This is an example of anonymous or confidential. You leave a note on your professor's desk explaining the work is too hard. You do not leave your name and do not receive feedback on your note. This would be an example of anonymous or confidential. Derek is an EMT. He was on call and identified the patient as his mother's neighbor, Sally. He does not tell Sally that he knows her. This is an example of anonymous or confidential. Derek, again, is still the EMT, but this time he's on call and identified the patient as his mother's boss, Tom. He does not tell his mother that he saw Tom. This is an example of anonymous or confidential. This here you fill in the blank. It would be best practice to practice either anonymous or confidentiality when talking to your supervisor and professor about something sensitive that is happening in class. Okay, now I want to just introduce to you a little bit about ethical problems. You've probably all heard, oh, that's an ethical issue, or what is ethical about your behavior, or things, so on and so forth. These are all scenarios that we come up with when we think of ethics. But if you think about, or if you want to, let me back up. Looking at any of the ethical issues that come up, they will fall into one of three problems. So is it an ethical distress, an ethical dilemma, or a locus of authority? When we talk about ethical distress, these are situations that kind of challenge you as a person or your professional integrity. And these are situations that really tend to be more personal or on a personal note. When you talk about ethical dilemma, these are situations that involve two or more ethical principles. They often collide with one another. It's really hard to determine what is the best action because sometimes they're two undesirable outcomes that you're facing. So that would be an ethical dilemma. Locus of authority is really trying to figure out who is that primary decision maker, who is the responsible party per se. So these are the three ethical problems. We're going to talk much more about this in class when I come back next week, and we're going to get some examples and go into much more detail. But the Code of Ethics that is posted on Moodle will also talk about this. So please, again, be sure to look at that. The next thing that I want to just introduce is ethical principles, which we talked about in the last slide. But ethical principles fall into one of 7 areas. So autonomy and confidentiality, veracity, privacy and confidentiality, a little bit different, beneficence, non-maleficence, fidelity, and procedural justice. We're going to talk much more about these again next week. We're going to talk about how a person might take a stance if they were debating an ethical problem. So we're going to get much more in detail. But again, all of this is broken down in that OT Code of Ethics that is posted online. So hopefully you get a little bit better understanding of each of these components. So next week, we're going to finish up the ethics lecture. We may find time to have like a small mini debate. So I think that it's kind of a cool thing to kind of put things in perspective when we talk about the ethical problems and principles. So we'll be finishing that up on Tuesday. On Thursday, the 24th, we're going to be having the Unit 3 exam that will be covering everything from the activity analysis information that we've been working on, the OT practice framework, and the lectures on ethics. Your second activity analysis is due on Sunday, the 27th by 11:55 p.m. The assignment is already posted online, so please take time to look at that. You can certainly begin working on it. This will be on, and you'll be analyzing an activity of your choice, using the feedback previously provided that you've learned from your peer partners, but we will not be doing peer reviews on this activity analysis. I'm hoping that you will have the information back from me for your feedback before class next Tuesday. So therefore, it gives you a few days to actually then finalize your activity analysis prior to submitting it. So I look forward to seeing you guys next week. I'm going to miss you this week, of course, and but I'm available if you need me. I will be available in spurts, so please email or text me, and I'll get back to you during my breaks and also during my break-in travel time. So have a good rest of your week. We'll talk to you soon.